The Innkeeper by Life Sketcher. Chapter 1551 Decoff. Within the countless galaxies in the origin realm, a majority had no official rulers or owners. They usually consisted of multiple powers that were strong, but not technologically advanced enough to exert their control over the entire galaxy. Sometimes mastery of formations and spirit treasures was also sufficient to bridge the gap between the stars across the entire galaxy, but those were rare cases. That did not mean, however, that such galaxies were devoid of powerful beings. Even most heavenly immortal cultivators were unable to traverse the vast distances in space with their body alone in any reasonable frame of time. Something like that would require a celestial immortal. Within one such galaxy, there was a specific star system with a 4-star planet. It was rich in spiritual energy, and abundant in resources. Yet such a planet, which should have been teeming with life, was practically barren, with very few, very specific life forms managing to survive. Cold winds carried thickening energy even during the daytime, when the sun shone brightly on the surface of the planet. Desolate ruins dotted across the surface of the planet, revealing hints of a rich and vibrant past. Now, though, the planet told the same story no matter what part of it was visited: death. Or, to be more accurate, the undead. Though civilization seemed to have come to an end on this planet, it was not without activity. From small skeletal lizards climbing large rocks, to skeleton soldiers trudging across fields, to necrobirds and undead leviathans, this was a world belonging solely to the undead now. There was no distinction between races anymore, for whether the bones belonged to a human, a lion or a shark, in death they were all equal members of the undead nation. The trillions of undead on the planet formed their own unique ecosystem, and so did the ecology. The abundance of undead caused all the energy on the planet to slowly turn into death-ending energy, and so only plants which thrived in such environments grew. As death energy became abundant, ghosts began to appear, feeding on the necrophiles within the undead, while the undead feasted on the ectoplasm of the ghosts. Simultaneously, ghosts also fed on other ghosts and undead also devoured other undead, all of them trying to slowly become stronger. It was a never-ending cycle of devour and be devoured that affected the entire planet, save one single region where neither undead nor ghost dared to enter. It was a simple cabin by the side of a lake, scarcely filled with any items. A bed, a table, a picture frame, and a few other mundane items occupied the interior, though the most unique thing within that cabin, at least with respect to the rest of the planet, was that the cabin was occupied by the only remnant of the planet's past. The Lich opened his eyes when he heard a sound he had not heard since the planet had been cleansed. New quest: the living once again prove themselves a scourge, blaspheming the holy ritual of a death match. Shepherd into death those who break the peace at a special event. Quest limitation: all memories pertaining to the quest will be wiped upon completion of the event. Quest reward: phylactery upgrade. Quest remarks: life is a curse unto existence. Death is the only salvation. A moment later, the Lich disappeared, and with it an army of the strongest undead that cursed that planet. Within the origin realm, there weren't a lot of 5-star planets, and each one served a very important role. Some, such as the planet Zuri, were not under direct control of the Henali. Those were usually extreme and unusual cases, for example in the case of Zuri, wherein the planet was actually one of the bodies of Zuri, the 4-leaf clover. But generally, such as in the case of Dunya, these planets were all under direct control of the Henali even if the residents didn't necessarily realize it. On one such planet, a Henali stood behind the counter of a simple coffee shop, welcoming guests as they came in. The Henali was, of course, not in his natural appearance. As a general rule, the beings within the origin realm did not respond well to seeing the seemingly bizarre appearance of the Henali, so he took on the appearance of an otter. This artisan coffee shop was the oldest on the planet, and had quite a reputation for the owner would specially hand brew each coffee that was ordered. It was not a quick process, sometimes even taking up to several hours to brew just a single cup of coffee. Yet the result was so fantastic that it was always worth it. What no one on the planet knew was that the owner of the coffee shop was actually also the planet's overseer. What no one save the owner, including all the other Hanali, knew was that the coffee shop was actually a part of his cozy cafe system. Just as the owner was about to accept a new coffee request, he heard a notification sound. New quest, an event is taking place, and it lacks good coffee. Go serve coffee at that event. Also, kill anyone who wants decaf. Okay, don't actually kill them, but give them coffee so hot it burns their tongue. Also, kill anyone who causes a ruckus. For reals this time. Quest limitation: all memories pertaining to the quest will be wiped upon completion of the event. Quest reward: void dough milk. Quest remarks: this is a large event on a timer, so for goodness sakes, serve more than 1 cup of coffee during the event. Sheesh. The owner stared at the notification for a long time, deciding whether he wanted to take part in the event or not. He wasn't a fan of being rushed, and didn't like the idea of mass-producing coffee. But then again, he'd never tried void dough milk either. With a sigh, the Hanali took off his apron and looked towards his customers. Dear guests, I'm afraid there's a situation so the shop will have to temporarily shut down. Please do excuse me. Chapter 1552. Don't embarrass me. This is your first and only warning, said the masked man, his hand gently pressed on the shoulder of a large wolf. It is against in rules to attack other guests. If you wish to fight someone, you can openly challenge them to a match, or go join the arena and participate in one of the many ongoing fights. But attacking other guests, no matter what your personal issues, is strictly prohibited. The man did not glare, nor did he try to intimidate with his presence, though the aura of the mask alone was enough to do that. He merely informed the misbehaving guest of the inn's policy, seemingly completely oblivious to the entire pack of wolves glaring at him with murder in their eyes. A pack of earth immortal wolves was not something just anyone could cross, nor was it the kind of force that could easily be tamed. Each and every wolf waited for their pack leader, the one whose shoulder the human was pressing, to give the signal. They would fall upon him so quickly and with such great ferocity that the human would never know what hit him. They kept waiting, but the aforementioned signal never came. That was because none other than the pack leader himself could feel the immense ferocity of the mere human. Although the pack leader was a heavenly immortal, and the human exuded an aura of a mere earth immortal, the danger packed within his body exceeded what the wolf could understand. It was like packed within that dashing suit was a creature more fearsome than a dragon, more powerful than a cataclysm, and more bloodthirsty than the most wild animal. The most absurd thing was that the pack leader could tell for certain that the human's strength was not limited to just his aura. Although he had merely placed his hand on the wolf's shoulder, the wolf's entire body was frozen under his grip. He could not circulate any energy within his body at all, and even his blood only flowed at the bare minimum level required to maintain health. As if that was not all, the wolf's soul was suppressed too, as was the very space his body occupied, and the boundaries of his thoughts. Literally, the wolf was unable to think about anything other than how fearsome the human was, mostly because of the pressure bearing down on his spirit. Yes sir, the wolf finally managed to utter, and the masked tyrant finally withdrew his hand and disappeared, completely ignoring the entire pack. The pack leader suddenly trembled and looked around warily, as if he had just woken up from a nightmare. The pack was confused, but the leader did not explain. Instead, he just led the entire pack into their private booth to watch the death match so that they no longer interacted with others. Lex, meanwhile, teleported to the next troublesome guest with no time to spare. One after another, he dissuaded guests from breaking rules, always ensuring that he went specifically to troublemakers he could personally handle. He was simultaneously handling the millions of other guards who had been hired, sending them exactly to troublemakers that were within their scope to handle. Despite the addition of numerous other guards, there just weren't enough to patrol the entire inn, and so had to be teleported exactly where they were needed. Fortunately, the mental strain of coordinating so many guards with all the troublemakers was getting easier with each passing second, as the inn kept welcoming more and more guards. From humans to devils, angels, marzu, dragons, celestials, and a bunch of other races Lex had never seen before, the guards kept appearing and all of them seemed to know exactly what to do. There was one particular guard whose very sight caused Lex to pause. He didn't have a distinct body shape or appearance. Rather, looking at it was like looking at every single fear and nightmare Lex had ever had. The guard was like the personification of every fear Lex had ever had, and caused Lex to instinctively feel repulsed. He almost had an urge to attack the guard and kill it himself, but he restrained himself. The moment he realized that he was under some kind of unusual external influence, it vanished, causing his mood to return to normal. Lex immediately realized what had happened, for he was too familiar with it. That particular guard was cursed, much as the fairies were cursed. The difference was that the curse affecting that guard, causing everyone and everything to hate it, was much stronger than the curse affecting fairies. Lex's eyes flashed, and he almost considered sending that guard away. But with his strength at the very peak of the celestial realm, he could probably take care of himself. Suddenly, a particular guard appeared with an army of heavenly immortal skeletal soldiers under his command, and the strain on the insecurity team immediately reduced. It was interesting because he was only the second lich Lex had ever seen, and he was entirely unlike Anita. Anita, the pregnant lich who worked for the inn, still looked entirely human, and was so beautiful she was practically angelic. This lich, on the other hand, looked exactly as one would expect. He had a skeletal body with the skeleton of a griffin, with a deep green fire burning within the bones. The aura around him was also extremely baleful, entirely unlike Anita. He wondered why there was such a huge difference between the two, but didn't have time to focus on that. Just as he was to teleport himself away one more time, a new guard appeared. This one was a Henali. He immediately applied to the innkeeper to make an announcement, and after hearing about the details of what he wanted to say, Lex gave him permission. The next moment, a massive projection of a Henali appeared over the inn. All those from the origin realm, behave, the projection of the Henali ordered, his voice carrying a soul-shaking fury. If you break the rules of the Midnight Inn, you will be banished from the inn. Then I will personally lead a freaking army to wipe out your entire planet. Don't embarrass the origin realm on the universal stage. That seemed to solve the problem, at least for now. But Lex's expression turned unusual as he observed what the Henali guard started doing the moment the projection ended. Chapter 1553 The Worth of 10,000 Metric Tons. Within the group chat for System Hunters, the very one that the two Rhino Centaurs were basic members of, there were channels for very senior level members. In the channel with the highest level of security, one of the oldest, most mysterious members of the group chat started to type. Although he said no words, just the symbol of him typing was enough to get the attention of all members who were paying attention. After all, every time he spoke, something major happened in the universe, and each time there was a system behind it. The last time this user had spoken, the entrance to the nightmare realm was discovered, leading to one of the most brutal wars in modern history. Everyone waited with bated breaths, wondering what secret he had learned now. When he finally sent a message, however, everyone was surprised. It went against the very purpose of the group chat. Single Forever 55, there's a system convergence event happening right now. However, we must not try to locate it, or try to infiltrate it. Ignore this warning at your own peril. The Henali, who had donned the appearance of an otter, seemed extremely irritable. He seemed even more vexed than Lex at the misbehaving guests, though Lex began to suspect his reasons were not as noble as he portrayed them to be. In the projection, for which Lex needed to have a talk with him, he had said that the behavior of those from the origin realm was embarrassing the realm on the universal stage. Now, ordinarily, Lex would believe that to be true to a certain extent. Yet this otter seemed to have body language that was too easily readable. The otter was irritated that people had distracted it from what it really wanted to do. As for what that was, Lex watched oddly as the otter stepped into the patisserie and queued up in line, waiting anxiously while staring at the menu. A few moments later, when it was his turn, the otter ordered a cappuccino and a croissant, and then eagerly waited for his order to be completed. Lex sighed, and then teleported over. He gave the otter the courtesy of having the conversation before his order arrived, so he wouldn't be distracted during it. "Hey, new guy, said Lex as he walked up to him, still wearing the invincible tyrant mask. I'm going to warn you only once. Don't threaten innocent guests. That's not how we do things at the inn. The otter's expression instantly fouled, and he looked at Lex as if he had blasphemed against him. Yet to his immense surprise, he was greeted only with indifferent eyes. Neither his personal strength, nor his identity as a Henali, nor his latest identity as a guard intimidated the masked man. As a Henali, it is within my rights to govern the residents of the Origin Realm, he stated bluntly. And as an employee of the Midnight Inn it is my right to not give a shit. Do not threaten guests of the inn again. If they're breaking the rules, that's one thing. But if you threaten them just because you're too impatient, then go find another gig. The otter's expression turned incredibly solemn, staring at the masked man with a dangerous glare in his eyes. Unfortunately for the otter, it had chosen the wrong target. More importantly, no matter what kind of expression he made, he still just looked like a cute otter to Lex. The two entered into a standoff, and just as it seemed like it would turn into something much more serious, the otter's order was complete. Fine, fine, I'll play nice, the otter immediately exclaimed and hopped on over to grab his order. He had to enjoy his treat while it was still fresh. Lex shook his head, certain that the otter hadn't actually taken his instructions seriously, and teleported away. He did not have the time to spare on spoiled kids. Fortunately, though, the situation at the inn had calmed down a lot after that projection, and as more and more guards began to appear, he finally had the time to focus on other things. Yet Lex did not rush to handle his other problems just yet. He had come to rely on this system many times, and he knew that the abilities it boasted were much too powerful for the meager amounts of MP he usually spent. Heck, he got himself a celestial-level bodyguard all those years ago, and he hadn't even spent much MP. Now though, he had spent over 10,000 metric tons all at once, all on the event's security no less. If all he got were guards, he would be seriously disappointed. The real reason he had spent so much all at once was not because he suddenly panicked. He was much too experienced to panic so easily. No, the reason he spent it all was because he was testing the limits of the system. A fight between two celestial immortals was enough to attract the attention of over 100 billion guests from across the Origin Realm. But since one of those two fighters was actually someone who worked directly for the Henali, Lex actually expected that a Dao Lord from the Henali might show up. Never before had Lex thought to challenge a Dao Lord. In fact, he still didn't think of it, since his system had been pretty clear in stating that it was still weak in the face of the Dao. Even so, he wanted to see what it could do. At first, he almost felt disappointed. Nothing interesting or exciting was happening. But that's when his host attire attracted his attention towards something else entirely. The Midnight Realm was protected by a destiny-level formation that isolated the realm entirely, and was something Lex had relied on for a long time. Now, though, that formation began to fuse into the realm itself, causing a mutation in the realm itself. As if that was not enough, he got another prompt from his attire, though this time it was so weak he almost couldn't feel it. Just as many new guards had been automatically summoned to the inn, a new kind of energy was summoned into the inn, a kind of energy Lex had never felt before, nor could he understand. As soon as it entered the inn, it began to dissipate, and mix into the very fabric of the realm. Lex suddenly got the feeling that as long as that energy existed within the inn, if anyone tried to divine anything related to it, they would regret it. Lex's eyes flashed, and he suddenly teleported to his office, replacing the Innkeeper's projection. He handed all security tasks to Gerard and Luther, and he himself began focusing on the changes happening to the inn. Some of them, he felt, were permanent, such as the fusion of the protective formation. Others, however, would probably only last as long as the ongoing event, which is usually what happened when Lex used the event panel. But Lex had a feeling that he needed to imprint every single change happening directly into his mind. He had wanted to study realms and how they operated, and the changes happening to the Midnight Realm in real time were so extraordinary that he doubted he could learn about them from anywhere else. After careful deliberation, Lex even activated his karmic vision, watching how the karma of all the beings within the inn changed as the realm underwent some changes. Lex had the right idea. Unfortunately for him, it was basically impossible for him to get the full picture of the changes happening to the realm, because the consequences of those changes weren't happening in the realm to begin with. Within a certain branch of the Versailles Bank there was a meeting going on, and it had been going on since the moment Ripley revealed his suspicions about the Innkeeper's realm. Let alone a few weeks and months, even centuries would be too short a period to deliberate over an organization that potentially had a being above a Tao Lord. Especially one who was so blatantly announcing his seat of power to the universe. Yet at this moment, many people in that room suddenly began to bleed from their eyes. Not all of them, no. Only those who had clones within the inn, and were spying on it with malicious intent began to bleed. Then they collapsed, falling onto the floor, their bodies trembling as if they had seizures. Then everyone in that room suddenly started to feel as if they were suffocating. Fortunately, all they needed to do was stop trying to conspire against the inn for the feeling to elapse. Somewhere else in the universe, a member of the system group chat decided to ignore the sacred words of Single Forever 55 and tried to divine where the system convergence event was taking place. To be safe, the member used a perk he got from his own system. But in the face of Lex's 10,000 metric tons, there was no place that was safe, at least up to a certain level. Not only did the divination fail, he got hit with an emergency quest the likes of which would most certainly get him killed. Inside Eden, a group of angels were meeting to discuss how to politely convince Lex to give up on the favor Shireen had asked of him. But however polite their intentions may have been, the retribution of the system was definitely not polite. Their feathers started to fall out and a certain dread suddenly gripped them. All across the universe, anyone who had even the slightest iota of malicious intention towards the Midnight Inn was made aware of just how bad of an idea it was to plot against it. Chapter 1554 Universes Playing Ground. There was a first time for everything except, of course, time travel back in time. But excluding things that fundamentally altered the universe, there was a first time for everything. When Lex became an immortal, he hardly ever came across situations where his mental capacity was strained. Even simultaneously controlling a dozen clones, living out their lives did not make him as much as sweat. But as he activated every sense he had available, from spirit sense, to soul sense, to the ability of his left eye to see through everything, to his karmic eye and even the ability of his tenet to detect laws, he felt strained. To be specific, it was not activating all those senses simultaneously that strained him, but trying to absorb all the information about how the realm was changing put him under an immense strain. What started out slowly and subtly was becoming fast and more obvious, to the extent that even some guests could tell that something was happening. They couldn't tell what was happening, but they could tell that something was happening. Of course, none of them were concerned because the Midnight Inn was absolutely safe, and the changes somehow made them feel even safer. But none understood even a fraction of what was happening besides Lex. The Midnight Realm was undergoing a fundamental change, patching up flaws and security risks Lex did not even know existed. One would think that Lex would get tired of encountering problems he didn't even know existed. But, to be fair, he was very young, and the universe was very old, so it was only fair that there was a lot of stuff he didn't know about. More importantly, even if he didn't know about them before, he was learning about them now. That was precisely why he felt so strained. The maturity level of a realm depended on how many of its laws had been formed or become concrete. Most of these laws formed naturally, or as a result of the trends of the realm. For example, the very existence of the Tree of Heaven for so long within the Midnight Realm, and the immense influence it exerted on the realm, resulted in laws necessitating the existence of such a tree. Now, in the very spot where the previous Tree of Heaven died, a new tree had already grown, primed to take over some of the climate and spiritual energy control that it used to do. Similarly, the existence of the Midnight Inn would, over the years, begin to shape the laws of the realm to adapt to its existence. Now, under the influence of the changes that the inn was causing, some of those laws began to form prematurely. Moreover, instead of forming randomly, they were being gently guided towards a specific direction. That intrigued Lex more than anything. The laws still formed naturally, as the formation of laws was an extremely complex process that even Tao Lords studied. But a subtle nudge here, a soft addition of a certain kind of energy there, and the end result seemed to complement the inn's needs perfectly. The greatest change that Lex could directly notice, which coincidentally also served the inn perfectly, was that the environment underwent the slightest change. Much in the way that the Seraphim Resort created an environment that kept everyone just slightly positive, the environment inside the inn changed ever so slightly so that residents were less likely to suffer infiltration from heart demons or internal demons. Considering that demons were very real, and were under control of devils, making their infiltration less likely was closing a security flaw that Lex had never even considered really. At the same time, it made the environment inside the realm more comfortable, even if the residents didn't understand why. The greatest tragedy was that even though Lex could observe every change taking place, he couldn't even understand 10% of what was actually happening. In the hopes that it may one day help him, he tried to memorize all the changes so that one day when he was at a higher cultivation level, he could look back and learn from it. Yet trying to memorize what was happening in the realm was like trying to catch the wind with one's hands. Lex could, of course, do exactly that if he wished. But in this example, the person trying to catch the wind was a mortal, so it wasn't really possible. Yet even what he could observe was a mere fraction of the level of detail that the system was going into to protecting the inn during this event. Within the folklore realm, a rumor began to spread about an inn that was perfectly safe. Within the nightmare realm, all memory of the inn faded, as if no one in the universe could have a nightmare with the Midnight Inn in it at all. The record keeper in the realm of legends wrote down in his scroll that of all types of hospitality establishments, one was least likely to suffer harm inside an inn. The void around the Midnight Realm became more turbulent and difficult to traverse, and somehow became a deeper point of the void, seldom traveled. The influence of destiny on the inn weakened even further, and the connections of karma that the inn had across the universe no longer pointed to the realm, and instead pointed to the foundation of the universe itself. 100 such changes occurred every second, and 1,000 changes, even more abstract, occurred every moment. Of all the changes, Lex noticed one change that was most unusual and seemed to have nothing to do with protecting the inn at all. The curly fries being sold in all the restaurants across the realm suddenly became crunchier and more delicious. The deliciousness factor was entirely objective, and they would have appealed to any race regardless of their taste. He could not understand at all how that helped protect the inn at all, but he wasn't really going to complain about having delicious curly fries. For 40 short, or exceedingly long based on who was asked, minutes Lex observed the changes that happened in the realm until they eventually stopped. With literal smoke coming out of his ears, Lex finally relaxed, and allowed his body and mind to calm down. Even though he had been focusing on the realm, he kept a portion of his mind on the situation inside the inn, and it had all calmed down. The number of guests had somewhat stabilized around 140 billion, and the majority of them were behaving. A small portion of them still misbehaved, whether out of habit or some other ulterior motive, but the Midnight Inn now seemed to have a formidable number of guards keeping watch. Even the otter was behaving, so all things considered, this event was going really well. In fact, things were so under control that Lex even felt like he could relax and actually watch the death match. There was only an hour and 40 minutes left to the match itself, so just enough time to take care of things. Considering that the number of guests inside the inn was greater than ever before, it would be just right for the innkeeper to make an appearance. Although Lex didn't like the fact that the otter had threatened a majority of his guests, it was a fact that his statement had dissuaded most troublemakers. That was recognition. The Hinali's strength was recognized and feared, while the innkeeper had a reputation among those who knew of him. Yet the majority of his guests, at least a majority of his guests today, had no idea about him. Now this wasn't to say that Lex would make a blatant display of power. Nah, he wouldn't do something so crass. He would just send a projection, maybe say a few welcoming words, make everyone feel welcome. If, by pure happenstance, during that process, the guests felt his aura and were impressed, then that would just be a happy coincidence. Lex sat back in his chair, allowing his body to cool down and recover from his previous exertion, as he planned his next steps. He had to admit, he felt a hint of anticipation for the upcoming match. As if in response to his anticipation, Lex heard a sound he was all too familiar with, but was not expecting at all. With a hint of confusion, he looked towards his system interface. New joint quest issued. New joint quest. On a battlefield of ancient powers, the Reaving Dread carve out a path towards salvation. Yet on their epic journey, all their allies fell, and none could offer them aid. Legends need none to offer them a hand in battle, but occasionally they need respite. Bring the Midnight Tavern to those who need rest, and cannot leave their duties unfulfilled. Time to quest initiation, 1 hour. Remarks: welcome to the universe's playing ground. Once you enter, there's no going back, so make sure to use the bathroom before you leave. Chapter 1555 Exposed. Lex read the notification multiple times just to be sure he understood everything correctly. Honestly, considering how infrequently he received quests on a regular basis, he wasn't sure just how common joint quests would be. Of course, there were times when he would get a lot of quests, but the frequency was still intermittent. He summarized that the irregular quests were as a result of the system still being semi-broken. He had suspected, due to the very nature of joint quests, that their frequency wouldn't be determined by the broken state of his own system. One instance was not enough to determine the outcome. The problem now was that he wasn't sure what to expect. For example, the joint quest notification specified that the quest would be initiated in 1 hour. What did that mean? Would he be teleported elsewhere, or would the Midnight Tavern be teleported there? At the moment he had 2 taverns, one in the Crystal Realm and one in Arrakis. He wanted to move neither, nor was he sure that they would suit the needs of this specific joint quest either. So did that mean he had only 1 hour to make a new tavern if he didn't want to move those 2? Much more important than those 2 was another glaring issue. Through this quest, it had basically been confirmed to Lex that the Reaving Dread mercenaries were run by a system user. Similarly, the owner of the Reaving Dread would now know that the Midnight Inn was run by a system user. Considering the fact that one of the best ways to increase a system's rating was by absorbing other systems, this put him at grave risk. Especially because the Midnight Inn was in no way, shape, or form able to compete with the Reaving Dread mercenary group. The only thing Lex could think of that might save him if the mercenary group decided to attack was a full-powered butter knife. Yet he had tried to goad the system into giving him another one of those multiple times to no avail. This was a significant issue, but he was not panicking just yet. "Mary, I have questions about the joint quests. You should have information on them now, right?" The redhead assistant popped up wearing goggles and a full-body swimsuit, holding a surfing board in her hand. "I really like the new projection guest zone you built," she said, not at all concerned about the pressure of the joint quest. "I'm glad you're enjoying yourself," said Lex, suppressing his lip from twitching. "But back to this thing about the joint quest. I have a few, moderately important issues to discuss if you have the time to spare." Yeah, go ahead," she said, plopping down on a projection of a beach chair. "You're right. The system has shared a lot of information about joint quests with me that I can now tell you. So what are your questions? Let's start with the big bad question. Now that the Reaving Dread are aware that the Midnight Inn is run by a system user, what's to stop them from attacking the inn and taking over? It wouldn't even be that hard, considering a majority of our protection is handled by them to begin with." "A few things actually," Mary said. "You should already know that the systems are designed very holistically. Let's start with the fact that failing a joint quest automatically hits you with a penalty that causes your system to fall down in a grade. At lower grades, such as C and D, that might not be such a massive downgrade, but on higher levels it can practically cripple how a system operates. So, right off the bat, any possible gain that Reaving Dread would stand to gain from targeting you would be counteracted by the loss he would suffer from failing the quest. This protection works both ways. After all, keep in mind that the owner of the Reaving Dread does not know that the Innkeeper isn't really a Dao Lord. No matter how many heavenly or celestial immortals he may have, they're all pointless in front of a Dao Lord. Unless he's certain of his ability to defeat the Innkeeper, attacking the Midnight Inn would be foolish. Instead, he would be worrying about the possibility of the Innkeeper absorbing his system instead. Lex nodded, feeling a certain amount of pressure reduced. The very specific consequence acted not only as motivation to complete the quest, but as protection from all those involved in quests. Of course, this wasn't foolproof. The two parties could still target each other after the quest, not to mention that if a system user wasn't necessarily certain about their odds, they could ally with others to attack. After all, the allies didn't need to know about the system. As long as they targeted the organization and helped him take down the system user of the opposing faction, all one would need to do is ensure they get their hands on the system at the end. But that wasn't a certainty, and like Mary said, it posed a risk. The condottiere, the owner of the mercenaries, didn't know that the Innkeeper wasn't a Dao Lord. That alone should be enough of a deterrent for now. After all, it had been enough of a deterrent for the rest of the universe. But that's just the indirect form of protection. The more direct form of protection is that once you have a joint quest partner, it is unlikely for your partner to change easily. That means, for better or for worse, you're stuck together. In that case, having a powerful or competent partner is extremely important, because that would protect you from suffering devolutions in the future as well. If, in the middle of a joint quest, one of the system users were to fall, that does not mean the quest would be finished. Instead, the remaining party would have to continue the quest on their own until they are assigned a new partner. Much more importantly, there is a huge benefit to having an alliance with another system user. That's in case you encounter a competitive quest. This is another thing I've never heard of before, but it's essentially a quest that multiple system users compete with one another for to complete. Now that is much more dangerous. Chapter 1556. No room for hesitation. Competitive quests? What do you mean? Lex asked, not liking one bit what Mary was telling him. Fortunately, that was a feature he hadn't unlocked yet, so it wasn't an immediate concern. I'm not sure. Information on that isn't shared yet. All I know is that apparently having a decent joint quest partner can potentially help during competitive quests. Lex did not immediately respond, and instead leaned back into his chair to think a bit. The information he had was too limited, so he wasn't sure about his speculations. Even so, an image started to appear in his mind about what joint quests and competitive quests could mean, and he wasn't liking it one bit. He could imagine that as systems and system users became stronger, and entered onto the universal stage, the very existence of these two types of quests would dictate alliances and hostilities. He imagined, for example, if the Artica race and the Versailles Bank were led by system users, these two types of quests alone could dictate the actions of these two behemoths, affecting the very way in which the universe develops. If that was the case, whoever was in control of the systems, deciding on joint quests or competitive quests, would automatically gain control and power over a large portion of the universe. They could use the systems to target whoever was not under their influence, and slowly expand their control. If this were the case, he finally understood why it seemed like the system never wanted anything from him. That was because he himself, under the influence of these two types of quests, would become the resource. All this assumed that the systems were under someone's control, something he could neither confirm nor deny based on his given situation. More importantly, while he could bluff the rest of the universe with the Innkeeper, he could not bluff his system. But while such an explanation explained much, and unveiled an insidious plot, it also didn't make sense. Whoever could create the systems which had so much power didn't necessarily need others to help him attain power. Moreover, it would make more sense to give these systems to direct subordinates rather than random strangers across the universe if such a thing was his goal. Lastly, none of this conjecture fit in with the system's seeming objective of making decisions based on entertainment potential. Lex diverted his attention away from these thoughts. He didn't have the time to focus on other things right now. Alright, so the joint quests provide a certain level of protection for all parties involved, Lex said. Now let's move on to my other questions. I noticed a distinct lack of a quest reward mentioned in the notification. That's because the joint quest is like a double-edged sword. It is extremely dangerous, which is why it requires more than one system user in the first place. But, it is also a great opportunity for those who can grasp it. You see, the objective of the quest itself can become your reward, not to mention that you are exposed to numerous other rare and valuable opportunities you cannot find elsewhere. You could even say that, just like your other quests, your reward is determined by your performance. The only difference is that you have to go get your rewards yourself. If you are weak or incompetent, then the existence of joint quests is like a scam. But if you can make the most of the opportunity it brings, you can not only gain many rewards but you can make lasting alliances as well. Lex leaned back and thought about the situation a bit, tapping his finger on his chair as he did. But in reality he did not have a lot of time to waste, so in just a few seconds he had already gathered his thoughts and continued to ask questions. The quest notification said that I need to bring the Midnight Tavern to the Reaving Dread mercenaries, and that I have 1 hour before the quest is initiated. What does that mean? Am I going to be forcibly teleported somewhere? On the contrary. I believe this is a quest you don't even necessarily need to do yourself if that's what you wish. I think you can assign staff members as the tavern of your choice to be sent when the quest is initiated. The specific details of the quest are still missing, and it is entirely possible that more restrictions come into place. For example, the quest might claim that no immortals can join, or that only immortals can go. The limitations can vary, all depending on the specific quest itself. The time limit is just so you can prepare as much as possible. But to answer your other question, I do believe that whoever you designate will be teleported to the site of the quest. I mean, since you have to bring the tavern to a specific location, obviously you're going to have to get there somehow. Not just somewhere. I'm pretty sure I'm going to have to bring the tavern to a battlefield, and protect the guests until they recover. I expect that there is going to be some kind of attack, or any number of attacks while they rest and recover. I also expect that I'll have to continuously protect them over this period of time. That doesn't sound like a question, said Mary. The question is, how do I know what level of enemies to expect? If I don't know that, how can I prepare? Mary just looked at Lex, although to be fair, she was probably checking in with the system. After a few seconds she shook her head. You'll have to wait until the initiation to learn the details. My advice is preparing for the strongest enemies you can possibly contend against. Do your best and think about whether you want to go yourself, or if you want to send others in your place. Lex tapped his fingers on his desk for a few moments before coming to a decision. There was no hesitation or room for complaint in his mind. This was just one more obstacle in his path, and he would handle it like he always had. He couldn't help but think how unfortunate it was that Oren wasn't available right now. His help would have been ideal in designing a new tavern. But since he wasn't available, Lex had to make do with the next best option. His gaze suddenly turned towards a specific member of the Midnight Inn, one who had taken things easy for way too long. He couldn't help but wonder if his idea would work. Chapter 1557 Beginning Work. There was a question Lex wondered which was equally philosophical and literal. If an object came to life, was it now a person or could still be treated like an object? As he stared at the massive spaceship he got from the Cthulhu, the very one that had come to life and had developed a fear of heights, the one that had served as a daycare for so long, and wondered if he could still treat it as a spaceship, or if now counted as a worker of the inn. Considering his requirements, if he could treat this ship as a tavern, that would be perfect. The original purpose of this ship was life support. It had state-of-the-art healing technologies, which, when paired with the system's functions, would be perfect to help a group of mercenaries heal and recover from battle. The ship was also incredibly sturdy, and could take a beating in case they were attacked. Given the short notice, this was perfect for a tavern. Alas, when he asked Mary to confirm whether he could treat the ship as a tavern, she stated that he could not. The condition to establish a new tavern is that you have to make it by hand, and then submit it to the system for review. If it passes the review, it will become a new tavern that can be used. It's pretty much the same as you had to do with the Treehouse Tavern. Yeah, but the problem now is that I don't really have the time to make a new one, and I don't really want to use the old ones. I mean, that escape room down in the Treehouse Tavern is incredibly popular. People haven't left it since the day it was launched. It would be pretty sucky to just suddenly kick them out of the tavern and make the tavern disappear. They should at least get the chance to solve the escape room first. I think the fact that you can prioritize your guest's addiction to the escape room means you're not as worried about this as you're pretending to be, said Mary. Lex looked back at her, though he didn't respond. In truth, these days, the only thing that really troubled him were things connected to the Tao, for there was almost nothing he could do about them save bluff as the innkeeper. Everything else at least gave him plenty of options with how he could respond. So, to an extent, Mary was right. He was not entirely concerned because he already had multiple ideas for what he could do. He just hoped that whatever enemies he would have to face, they would be Earth immortals, or Heaven immortals at most. Any stronger than that, and he had no chance of surviving this quest. Lex immediately contacted Pell Jr., his current cultivation mat, and gave him a rather harsh task. I need you to remove as many scales from your body as you can, in perfect condition. You have 20 minutes. I'll send over some helpers to aid you in this task. Though the request was kind of harsh, Pell Jr. did not mind at all. The soul inhabiting the body was still much too weak, so anything at all that could be done to weaken the body he would do happily. This was especially because the heavily nourishing environment inside the inn was actually slowly strengthening the body. Even with Lex actively absorbing a lot of its power during his cultivation sessions, the progress was not enough to allow the soul to perfectly take control of the body. So, while this task sounded harsh, it was actually the kind of thing he already did on a regular basis. In fact, Lex already had quite a stockpile of Heaven Immortal dragon scales, the perfect building materials for his latest tavern. He had a wooden tavern and a treehouse tavern. Now, he was going to make a castle tavern. Wasting no more time, Lex immediately conjured over 20 clones of himself and sent them all to complete various tasks. One worked on the blueprint of the castle, another made his way to the Vividal forge in the dwarf city to heat it up for use, while another made his way to collect some mountain milk, while another yet went to gather a handful of the waters from the Chaos Sea. Over the years, the number of rare materials Lex had found inside the Midnight Realm were immense, and now he began gathering each and every one that was related to durability or toughness. That included getting his hand on some wood from a void stabilization sequoia tree, which he would use to build the skeletal structure of his castle. He immediately got to work on building the castle, which wasn't the issue. The issue he was actually concerned about was who he should bring along to manage the inn. The lack of information about the level of his enemy concerned him not because he was afraid for himself, but because he didn't want to expose his workers to an impossible enemy. In the end, instead of informing the workers about the upcoming mission, he just sent them a message informing them to stay ready, for there may be an unexpected mission coming up. Lex had a small hope that whoever assigned the joint quest wouldn't assign him a quest that was far too difficult for his level. But Lex didn't believe in relying on hope, so instead he focused more on improving the design of the castle. By creating an impressive tavern, and integrating the most powerful formations and laws he could manage, Lex hoped to create a structure that would allow them to fight above their level. If there was truth that seemed to translate equally well between mortals and immortals, it was that sieges were tough, and the advantage was always with the defender. Just as Lex began working on the castle, Luther returned to the Midnight Inn, and submitted a report about everything that had happened on his mission. Lex skimmed through the parts about him harassing and blackmailing the living planet. Instead, he focused on two key things. First, Luther had managed to upgrade his physique, and thereby his fire. Also, he had a lead on Hells. All that was well and good, but the news about Luther's new fire made Lex's eyes sparkle. He could use that in his castle. Chapter 1558 Forge the hell out of that castle. About 18 minutes after he started, Lex's main body arrived at the Vitaville forge alongside Luther. The dwarves had been evacuated this time, for Lex did not want a repeat of the 13,000 beard casualty incident. A monument to all the beards that were lost the last time he used the forge had been erected by the dwarves, and Lex couldn't bear the embarrassment if he repeated the situation. This was especially because now it was not just Lex's dragonfire that would be used in the forge. No, this time Luther's newly acquired hellfire would also play a role. Now, Lex was not too familiar with hellfire and how it differed from dragonfire, so he had to consult Luther on the matter. It was a risk using something he was unfamiliar with, but it couldn't be helped. Although he could make the castle in the remaining time, if he could speed up the forging process even further, he could further enhance the castle's strength and durability. "Are you ready?" Lex asked Luther, who had gone bald because hellfire burned all his hair off. The man claimed the baldness was temporary. For his sake, Lex hoped he was right. "Yes," Luther responded, his eyes glowing with a deep red. Lex didn't ask him again, and directly started the forging process. He activated the ability in both his eyes, using his left eye to see exactly how the process was going and his right eye to embed countless formations, arrays and glyphs directly into the foundation of the castle itself. Lex was moving fast, bringing in thousands of tons of materials directly into the forge and using his literal fists as hammers. Beside him, Luther was pouring in deep red flames that seemed more liquid than fire as they emerged from his body. If dragonfire was raging and furious, then hellfire was controlled and incredibly lethal. Of course, even the combination of two would never be enough to melt the scales of a heaven immortal dragon. That is why the supporting materials were so important. They acted like cement while the scales were like the bricks. The heat was enough, however, to severely affect both Luther and Lex. The situation was so drastic that both of them actually shed multiple drops of sweat during the process. Jokes aside, the temperature in the forge was unbearable, so the two had to block the heat using their bodies, so that everyone else involved in the forging process could tolerate the heat. Behind them stood Jace, who needed all the help he could get since he had not yet reached the immortal level. Jace was the inworker who could control the earth. During his time in the Midnight Battalion, he had been responsible for creating fortifications using his powers, and it was something he had refined to a great extent since then. In fact, he was a budding architect and structural engineer specifically focused on battle fortification, and had spent a great deal of time within the Temple of Fasting increasing his knowledge. That is why, even though his power was insufficient, his skill and expertise were more than sufficient to aid in the construction of the castle tavern. Besides him, there were a number of other inworkers, all of whom had unique occupations or knowledge, and each of them contributed to the best of their abilities, expediting the castle's creation and enhancing its ability. Once it would be complete, the castle would only be the size of a small toy car that could fit in a person's hand. It was only once activated using spiritual energy that the castle would grow to its full size and potential. Something like this should have taken much longer to prepare. Weeks, if not months, or even years should have gone into its planning and construction, but there was limited time, so nothing could be done about it. Fortunately, due to the very nature of the ingredients going into the castle's creation, it could be upgraded in the future when Lex had time. The value of the ingredients would not be wasted. As the minutes ticked down, coming ever closer to the time of the quest initiation, Lex became more and more focused. It was a tragedy that Lex had not seen his ancestors fight, or else he would have realized the immense untapped potential of his flow state that he had been overlooking. In the absence of that knowledge, Lex did the best he could, utilizing every last bit of his focus. "You need something to purify the malevolent influence of the hellfire, or it will forever taint the castle," Luther said. This was something he had already informed Lex beforehand, but seeing as how he had made no attempt at purifying it, he could not help but remind him. Forging was not something any of them were an expert in, and so they could not interfere with Lex's task at all. All they could do was assist him, and remind him where he seemed to be falling short. "No, it does not need purification. It only needs to be controlled. Why would I waste something as valuable as the influence of hell?" Lex asked as he activated his tenet, and began inscribing the laws of supremacy in the throne room of the castle. Just as the host attire let Lex control everything inside the inn, through the absolute command that sitting on the throne would avail him, through the absolute supremacy over every single aspect of the castle, he would be able to effectively control even the malevolent influences that were leaking into the castle through the hellfire. It would be yet another weapon for him to use against his enemies. After all, since he did not know what kind of foes to expect, he had to take a few drastic measures. One of Lex's clones stepped forward, holding in his cupped hands some of the liquid from the Chaos Sea. Within every single drop of that liquid was more energy than even Lex, as an Earth immortal, could absorb or easily control. Fortunately, he was not using it as a store of energy. Instead, he was using it to quench the molten joints of the castle and temper it on a cosmic scale. Although he could not achieve such a thing right now, ultimately Lex envisioned that this castle would be able to tolerate a siege from Ajorlum. Right now, he was just setting the foundation for it to reach such heights, eventually. Chapter 1559 Abaddon. With 4 minutes to spare, Lex finished his first version of the castle for the tavern, and wiped the sweat off his brow. It was not the heat that made him sweat, although the fires were so hot that they started to destabilize space. Just like how Lex could use brute force to break space, if he used a bit of his space affinity or spatial laws to target the space, the accumulated heat in the forge reached such an intensity, not just in terms of temperature but also spirituality, that the Midnight Realm was unable to tolerate it. Lex had to actively strengthen the space around them to continue the forging process. Lex had thought that the small amount of diverted attention would have made the castle weaker by the smallest amount, yet it was while he supported space and simultaneously forged that he had an epiphany. He suddenly gained a tremendous amount of insight into how the various aspects of forging a treasure affected one another, and so he immediately summoned Fenrir. His most loyal pet, and technically protector of the inn, had been sulking a lot lately. The clone of his sister really bothered him, and as of late he had started to run out of cloning facilities he could find. To make things worse, he hadn't found any leads on his sister either. But sulking had not made the pup lazy. Instead, he started to train with a ferocity Lex had never seen in him. Although his cultivation level was still below Lex's, his strength had started to grow rapidly, unlocking more and more bloodline abilities. In fact, Lex had started to detect traces of divinity in him. But the traces of divinity were not like that of an actual deity. Rather, it was like an offspring of a deity, his body baptized and enhanced by divine energy. So the reason Lex had called him was to make use of his new abilities. It was not divinity that Lex was interested in, rather his latest ability. So the reason Lex had called him was to make use of his new abilities. It was not divinity that Lex was interested in, rather his latest ability. Just as the forging process was about to be completed, the pup unleashed his newest technique, Ice Age. It was a formidable technique, using law manipulation that Fenrir would never be able to do on his own at his current level. That was the benefit of relying on bloodline techniques. With the finishing touches done, and the forging complete, Lex allowed the fires to dissipate and looked at his castle. Trapped in clear crystal with falling snowflakes, what appeared in front of Lex looked like a snow globe of a castle covered in fresh snow. In the final minutes for the quest was initiated, Lex submitted the snow globe to the system for analysis, and found it sufficient for a tavern. New notification, Castle Tavern unlocked. It was a simple notification, perhaps the shortest he had ever gotten. Yet it was exactly what he needed at that moment. He dismissed everyone who had helped with the forging, just in time for a series of notifications to drop in. Joint quest initiating. Quest parameters establishing. Quest details. In the pits of Abaddon, lost in the desolation, protected inadvertently by the locust armies, lays the chalice of the abandoned, containing decillions of condemned souls. Yet one among those souls is undeserving of his torment. 1,000,000 armies set off on a journey to rescue Xerxes, hero of the forgotten age, yet only one of them remains. The reaving dread have known no rest, have known no aid, have known no solace. Trapped in a part of the universe that should not exist, they must succeed, or die trying. Quest objectives dash. Main objective, bring the Midnight Tavern to Abaddon, providing sanctuary to the army of mercenaries whenever they need. While they rest in the tavern, provide them with protection and ensure that their experience is up to the full standard of the Midnight Inn. Optional objectives. 1. Assist the reaving dread in rescuing Xerxes. 2. Discover the secrets of Abaddon's existence. 3. Discover the secrets of the forgotten age. 4. Discover the origin of the chalice of the abandoned. 5. Locate the well of forgotten dreams. Additional information: Abaddon is a place that defies the logic of the universe, existing outside the laws that govern reality. From across the universe, a small percentage of dead souls are somehow attracted to Abaddon through means unknown, and then sent to the chalice of the abandoned, the well of forgotten dreams, and potentially to numerous other unknown areas. All knowledge of Abaddon is forbidden, and exists only as long as those who witness it live. Should the members of the Reaving Dread die, all knowledge of Abaddon, including its name and even existence, be erased from the universe until it is discovered again. As such, a majority of its secrets remain unknown. Within Abaddon exists armies of abominations known as locusts, though they bear no resemblance to the insect species. They are infinite in number, and exist at all power levels. Their most prominent trait is that they are only attracted to those souls within the same cultivation level as them, hence the only surviving members of the Reaving Dread are Earth Immortals. To bring anyone stronger would be to invite stronger foes, and to invite anyone weaker would be to condemn them to eternal damnation. The locusts do not die, and they do not end. They are a plague without start or finish, a curse upon the living, and a blight upon the dead. Quest requirements: 1. Midnight Tavern. 2. Midnight Battalion. 3. Minimum of 500 staff members. Lex read the most detailed quest outline he had ever received even as more information flooded into his mind. He was immediately faced with multiple difficult decisions, since he could feel that if he did not, the decisions would be made for him at random. Lex immediately selected the Castle Tavern to fill the requirements of the quest, informed Leonidas that his battalion of 300 soldiers was being deployed for an external mission, picked 500 staff members, as well as a few members of the inn he felt would be able to help a lot. The quest told him that he shouldn't take anyone weaker than an Earth Immortal, but he also didn't have 500 immortals to take his staff. But, at the very least, he likely wouldn't be facing celestial immortals. The next moment, he disappeared from the Midnight Realm, and so did everyone else he selected. Chapter 1560 Ravenous Maw of Hell. The first thing Lex noticed was the red, hazy sky filled with clouds of black dust. To see where the red light was coming from was impossible, its source blocked off by the clouds, and yet it spread across the entire land, painting everything in a ruby hue. The second thing Lex noticed were the abominations. Just as the sky was covered in dust, the ground was covered by disgusting abominations, the stuff of nightmares and malevolent thoughts, come to life. No two had the exact same body structure, with some of them being made out of bones, while others were made of rocks and dirt. In some random areas they had their guts exposed, pulsing with thick red blood which had a heavy stench even without spilling from their bodies. In other areas they had random limbs, either claws or wings, or even scythe-like extensions, all for the purpose of slaughter. The locusts, for such a massive swarm within Abaddon could be nothing else, had no souls, at least, as far as Lex could tell. Instead, the only thing that filled their living bodies was an unquenchable thirst for the very souls that they lacked. A glance was all Lex needed to see that their existence was outside of the norms of the universe. After all, within the universe, every living thing had a soul. Even the AI developed souls when they crossed the threshold for being lifeless code into something that was truly alive. But these things, which very much seemed like they were alive, lacked souls. Lex could, then, only conclude that instead of actual living things, they were semi-organic machines with a very prominent and specific directive. Yet the barbaric hunger evident within their eyes, at least for the ones that had eyes, made them appear like they were a twisted obscenity. In a split second, Lex took in the situation all around him, and discovered that they seemed to be within a canyon of some sort. A black, toxic river of sludge seemed to flow in a great torrent, snaking through the canyon base, forming natural barriers against the locusts who, despite being formidable in their own right, avoided the black river. In one of the bends created by the river, Lex saw an army entrenched in a temporary fortress created through a deployable formation. There were a few thousand immortal soldiers holding out against the tide of locusts that had surrounded them entirely, yet how long they could maintain such a situation was anybody's guess. There was a lethargy in their actions, as if fatigue had a hold on them that it would not give up. Their energy was waning, their sharpness dulled, and the speed drastically slowed down. In fact, it was quite clear that not only were they exhausted, they were wounded as well. If it weren't for the formation protecting them, they may have already perished. Lex looked from afar and judged that the army was being led by a magma lion, but even his flames seemed to be waning. The army needed immediate help, which is probably why the timing for his quest had been so urgent. The party from the Midnight Inn, too, did not have much time left to react, for the locusts had already noticed their arrival, and similar swarms were already rushing towards them. Z, do you want to take the lead on this? Lex asked as he scrutinized the locusts. Each one of them was at the very peak of the Earth immortal realm, wielding strange powers the likes of which Lex had never felt before. Any single one of them would have been a formidable foe, let alone a nearly infinite army of them. Yet, Lex was entirely relaxed. If there was one thing Lex had absolute confidence in, it was in his defense, and his ability to defend. Shouldn't Leonidas be taking the lead? Or Luther? Z asked hesitantly, looking at the two men standing beside them. They can handle it, of course. But this is a great learning opportunity for you. It's good to get some decent, real-world experience. Fenrir, who had accompanied the group, barked, as if agreeing with what Lex said. Okay, I guess I can try to take care of things. What do we have to do? I'll take us to them, Lex said, pointing towards the mercenary army, ignoring the sweeping tide of monsters between them. Once there, I'll deploy the castle tavern. From there, all you need to do is protect the tavern, and keep any locust from coming inside. How simple is that? The army of locusts was almost upon them, yet none of the group seemed to acknowledge their presence, or even prepare to face them. This close, the acrid stench of their blood permeated through their bodies and swept over the group from the Midnight Inn, trying to poison them. I suppose that sounds simple enough, said Z. Good, said Lex. Let's go. Lex spread his energy over the entire group, and suddenly they teleported away just seconds before the swarm of locusts reached them. They reappeared within the protective formation of the mercenary army, ignoring the barrier that was keeping the army alive as if it did not exist at all, startling the mercenary soldiers. Many of them, out of sheer instinct, attacked the group, yet Lex only had to raise his hand forward and all the attacks stopped, as if the very space around them had frozen. Welcome, guests of the Reaving Dread mercenary group, Lex said out loud, his voice calm yet pleasant, as if they were not within an infernal abyss. We are from the Midnight Inn, where guests come to rest and relax from across the universe. Yet when certain guests cannot make it to the inn, we bring the Midnight Tavern to them. It is our utmost pleasure to host you in our humble abode. Lex flung out a snow globe which immediately broke as soon as it touched the ground, exploding into a massive, sprawling castle with boundary walls 100 feet high. The dazzling sight of a castle made from dragon scales stunned the exhausted mercenaries, and it almost seemed like it stunned the locusts too. But no, that was just the suppressive effect of the castle, which would be warm and welcoming to its guests, and like ravenous maws of hell to those who would dare to challenge the strength of its walls. Chapter 1561. Don't underestimate the enemy. Cayman, the magma lion, stared up in disbelief. Whether it was the immense mental exhaustion, or the incredible physical fatigue, both were affecting him seriously, making him doubt the reality of what was happening. Their protective formation was a top-of-the-line product of Reaving Dread, used by their many armies, specifically designed to be the best in their level. It had literally saved their lives by resisting the hordes of behemoths, chimeras, and even locusts. The reason the formation was on the verge of failing was not through a shortcoming of the formation itself, but because of the exhaustion of the mercenary army. How, then, could it so easily have been penetrated? Cayman had been expecting reinforcements, true, though he didn't know who to expect. However, he never expected his reinforcements to make such an entrance. Moreover, he had heard of the Midnight Inn. The Reaving Dread covered security for the inn, so he did not expect the inn to have any formidable forces. If they did, they would not have needed to rely on them to begin with, not that there was anything wrong with that. Yet as the hundreds of humans easily slipped into their formation and summoned a castle from what looked like a poke orb. The most absurd thing was that only after they were surrounded by the large, secure-looking walls of the castle did Cayman focus on a message sent to him by the condottiere informing him about reinforcements from the Midnight Inn. Cayman was dazed, and as he turned away from the message and looked at the castle once more, he had a sneaking suspicion that the bricks of the castle were designed to look like dragon scales. The design choice was very reassuring, not to mention they also gave off a very warm and secure feeling, almost as if they could bear a siege against the universe itself. It was almost like they were actually being protected by a dragon. Cayman lifted his paw and touched the warm scale and felt the slight tremble in his bloodline, the very one caused by a suppression when facing a superior race, confirming that what he was touching was real dragon scale. Cayman didn't remember when his jaw dropped, but it certainly happened because he remembered closing it when he took a deep gulp as he looked up at the human floating above them all. Lex, meanwhile, hovered in the air, looking down on the mercenary army. The 500 staff members divided themselves into groups, some of them rushing into the castle to prepare it to welcome guests, while others immediately approached the injured soldiers to help them into the castle itself. Leonidas and his battalion of 300 soldiers, many of whom, but not all, had reached the earth immortal realm gathered on the boundary walls of the castle and prepared to defend it. Of course, since Z was taking the lead in the defense, they would wait to see how he commanded them. Lex, meanwhile, studied their situation himself. Breaking into their formation was incredibly easy for him. It wasn't because Lex was a master of formations, though having an eye that could see through the truth of the world, while another that could create formations on a whim certainly helped him spot the flaws and weaknesses in most formations. No, it was his in-depth understanding of defense that allowed him to see the weaknesses it had, and easily slip through them. Even then, Lex was not unveiling all his strength, nor was he making extra effort to take any large or drastic measures. His primary quest was to provide sanctuary and protection to the mercenaries, and he intended on completing that first. But even then, one of the reasons he wanted to let Z take the lead was because he wanted to focus on studying and understanding Abaddon as much as possible. The system prompt for the quest had made it quite clear to Lex that this place was extremely abnormal, and he wasn't going to let overconfidence affect his decision-making. Once he understood the depth of the enemy's strength, their strategies, and the way that this place functioned, he could then plan on fulfilling all the additional quests. Besides being dangerous, the very existence of this place intrigued Lex, giving him some dangerous ideas. Lex had long been looking for a place to build his midnight castle. The requirements for a location to build his castle was that it needed to be extremely hidden and hard to find. Once he could locate such a place, he would build his castle there, and hide his chamber of rebirth with a drop of blood in there as a backup for him to survive. Yet he would obviously not do something like that in a place where survival itself was impossible. However, if he could master the rules of this place, such an endeavor wasn't impossible. Besides just his own observations, he could rely on the knowledge accumulated by the Reaving Dread. No matter how he looked at it, this quest would last a long time unless they worked together. Even if they did work together, it might take a long time to find the chalice and save Xerxes from within it. "Do not let your guard down, the locusts are not so easily dealt with," said the magma lion once he recovered from his shock. He flew up to Lex and looked out at the army outside the walls. Physical attacks do them next to no harm, while spiritual and soul attacks are all but useless. The only concrete way to destroy a locust is to eliminate the hunger within their being. For that, we've been using the laws of absolute destruction. If you want, I can show you how we did it. Thank you for the advice. I will definitely take you up on your offer, but first I'd like to see how they react to the means of our forces. Don't take their threat lightly, Cayman advised with a hint of anxiety in his voice. Too many of our allies have died because they underestimated the enemies here in Abaddon. It's best to use your full strength right from the start. Lex raised an eyebrow and looked at the magma lion. Initially he was going to let Z take the lead, but it wouldn't hurt to get confirmation about his own lethality against the locusts first. He pointed a finger towards a certain direction, and shot out a bolt of silver sword intent. That was not his strongest attack, but it was certainly a highly destructive one. The lion and Lex both, alongside many of the battalion members as well as Z, turned to look at the attack, waiting to see how effective it was. They didn't have to wait long. Chapter 1562 came and fainted. The short, silver beam of sword intent cut into a particularly large locust that had just recovered from the shock it faced on the appearance of the castle. The beam of sword intent cut a most precise incision in the locust, and then entered its body without so much as causing the slightest disturbance otherwise. Then, nothing. It was like a pebble had been dropped into a dark abyss, all evidence of its existence lost. Lex showed no reaction, though Cayman turned to look at Lex as if he expected as much. Like I said, you need to dash. The magma lion began to speak, but was interrupted by a thunderous sound. When he turned to look, he saw the locust had fallen over, though he was very much still alive. Interesting. Let me try something else, muttered Lex, and shot out another beam of sword intent at the very same locust. Just like the previous one, the sword intent seemed to vanish into his body without causing any obvious reaction. Yet a few seconds later, thousands of other locusts all around it also collapsed on the ground, still alive if they could even be called that, but entirely unable to move. I think I have a gist of the lethality of the locusts, Lex said, looking over the sight of countless abominations lying limp on the ground. You need not worry, and can enjoy your rest assured that we have the situation well in hand. What did you do? Cayman asked in shock. Perhaps if his state were not so overextended, he would have been able to determine on his own what Lex had done. But in his current state, he was barely staying awake. Quite simple, actually. My sword intent is very sharp, and I've been training it to cut ethereal things so that one day I can use it to cut laws. Well, for now, it's nowhere near that level, so I used it to cut the connection between the hunger within that creature and its body. Considering it lacks a soul, I figured that the hunger acts as a replacement for the soul. The hunger, or whatever it really is, isn't as deeply integrated with the body as a real soul, so it was fairly easy to sever the connection between the two, especially since I'm fairly good at dealing with souls anyway. Once I was sure it worked, I had the urge to try something else. I'm not sure if you know this, but the Innkeeper is really famous for his mastery of karma, so I've been experimenting with that. Basically, I targeted the other locusts who had a strong karmic connection with the one I attacked, severing their hunger as well. Unfortunately, my own mastery of karma is quite weak, which is why I only had a 0.01% success rate, thus only affecting a few thousand. Anyway, I've gotten an understanding of what the locusts are capable of. We should have no trouble holding them off, so you can rest easy. Lex waved at Z, letting him know that he could take over the defenses now. Lex himself led the bewildered magma lion into the castle to help it get some sleep. The flabbergasted expression on the lion's face, and its inability to articulate anything convinced Lex that the poor mercenaries had really been through too much. Z, on the other hand, simply nodded towards Lex, and then turned back towards the locusts, who had by now recovered enough to try and attack the walls. He saw how easily Lex took down thousands of locusts, but did not take that to mean that the enemies were easy. Instead, he treated them even more seriously. If Lex, who he was convinced was a demi-dao lord in disguise, could only kill a few thousand locusts from a casual strike at the Earth Immortal level, then the locusts must be a terribly powerful foe. Everyone, get in position, and respond to my commands, said Z as he took to the air, flying right in front of the castle walls. From within his hoodie's pocket Z withdrew a slim, black stick which confused many. Some, who were familiar with the Marzu, mistook it for a wand, and wondered since when Z had taken up magic. Yet as he slowly raised his hand, and the very space in a baton vibrated under the direction of his baton, they realized it was not a wand. Instead, it was his choice of weapon. Z had taken the art of establishing background music for his fights to the next level, so much so that he had yet to encounter enemies who could tolerate the presence of the background music itself, let alone hang around long enough to actually fight. In directing the fight against the locusts, Z stepped into his role as a conductor, and the Midnight Battalion would be his orchestra. Amidst the deeply grave situation, a flicker of excitement and anticipation flashed through Z's heart. Maybe he'd finally be able to face enemies who could survive long enough for the bass drop of his custom background music for fights. Z's trembling hand reached a crescendo, and with it the surrounding space and inhabitants seemed to have reached some kind of zenith as well. The trembling space, in itself, was enough to rip the locust bodies to shreds, but the nearly immortal nature of their existence meant that they began recovering the very next moment only to be once again ripped apart by the trembling space. For one whole second, Z maintained his hands at their peak, holding the baton in a fixed position, keeping the pressure exactly where it was. Then, with a flourishing wave, Z dropped his hands in an arc, and began conducting. Unfortunately, today would not be the day he found a worthy opponent, nor would it be the day he led the Midnight Battalion in battle. Cayman, right before he entered the castle, turned once more to look at the situation on the battlefield just in time to watch Z unleash the law of pure epicness, erasing from existence all that which could not tolerate the arrival of the protagonist. Z had learned a new term from the latest anime he was watching, which was aura farming. Unfortunately, the abominations of Abaddon were not abominable enough for him to farm aura, at least the ones he was facing so far. Cayman fainted. Chapter 1563 Strange Local Customs. For several miles around the castle, the canyon was clear of all locusts. With the curve of the Black River forming a natural barrier on three sides of the castle, Z really only needed to focus on defending the front of the castle once he cleared the sides. As it turned out, clearing the locusts wasn't as hard as he had imagined. He literally had only begun the intro to his custom background music, and they all died. Yet Z would never believe that the trial in front of him was so simple. His devilish boss would never miss out an opportunity to make him work, and since Lex wanted him to get some real-world experience, there was no way that the scourge of locusts would be so easily dealt with. The very fact that Z could not determine what trouble it was that Lex expected him to face itself revealed that he was lacking in experience. He analyzed the situation in a little more depth. He recalled the mercenaries they had brought the inn to, and their condition. This was the first time Z had ever heard of the inn specifically bringing its tavern to a specific group of guests. That probably meant that these guests weren't ordinary. Either their identity was special, they had a very high in prestige ranking, or their relationship with the inn was unordinary. In either of those cases, that meant that these people were entirely unordinary. If, in that case, even they had been beaten to such a severe extent by enemies as weak and fragile as the locusts, then that must mean that there were other enemies they had not faced yet. Or, very simply, that the weak and pathetic locusts had just overwhelmed them with their unending numbers. Z's eyes brightened as he felt he got a hint. This was not a sprint, it was a marathon. None of them knew how long they would be here, wherever here was. In that case, if they faced endless hordes of enemies without rest, even they would get exhausted. That meant that the key to surviving this challenge was pacing themselves and ensuring they could last as long as possible. With the new strategy decided, Z instantly began to make changes to his plans, and just in time too. He could already see more locusts right towards them. Feeling like he had cracked the code, Z could not help but feel a little smug. Lex probably wanted to see him overexert himself and then get exhausted, only to get an opportunity to show off a little. Well, Z decided to fight in the most efficient manner possible without compromising security, not giving Lex the opportunity to show off at all. New strategy, guys. We're going to form an energy distribution formation and coordinate our defense now. This is how it's going to go. Standing atop the wall, Luther watched in silence as Z handled the defense, and said nothing. It was good to let them handle as much of the invading forces as they could. If things got out of hand, then Luther could step in. After all, with his anachronistic ignition bloodline, he would never run out of energy. Moreover, the more he used his bloodline, the more he could study how it used the law of time so effectively. If Luther ever managed to learn how to control the law of time on his own, his strength would increase exponentially. Although they were out here on a mission, each one of them had their own thoughts going through their heads. Within the castle, the mercenaries were still on edge. The transition from fighting for their lives to suddenly being transported to a warm, safe tavern, filled to the brim with wonderful food and excellent hospitality, was too quick. They could scarcely believe what was happening. After all, how many years had they been fighting without seeing so much as a speck of warmth and safety? The truth was, even they themselves did not remember. Who kept track of such things when in hell? Over the years, while they survived and yet all their allies kept dying, one of the reasons they had survived was because they never let down their guard, and treated each situation with the utmost seriousness. That is why when a human dressed in a rather handsome suit walked up to one of them, and offered a refreshing drink on a tray he was carrying, the mercenary who was offered the drink responded by retreating swiftly and raising his shield. Truthfully, the smiling faces and the comforting ambience of the tavern was more stressful than the battlefield they had just left. Each and every one of them was wondering if they were actually trapped in some kind of illusion or spell. It couldn't be helped. The only one of them who had gotten news about the arrival of the Midnight Inn was Cayman, who had been too stunned to share the news with his men. Confused, unaware of what was really happening, and delirious from fighting non-stop against enemies who refused to die, the mercenaries had not resisted when they were ushered into the castle, yet they were too cautious to take advantage of the amenities they were being offered. If you are not in the mood for refreshments, then would you like to follow me to the medical wing of the tavern? Our staff are getting things running, but even then, just entering a recovery room should be more than enough to begin healing your wounded bodies, said one of the workers to a group of mercenaries. How do you know about our wounds? Asked the beast, covered from head to toe in blood, with large gashes evident all across his body. You're devils who have infiltrated our minds. Don't believe them, brothers. What castle would smell like fresh linen sheets? This is a deception. A deception, I tell you. The workers looked at each other, unsure how to calm down their guests. The mercenaries huddled together, for warmth and protection. Just as it seemed there would be no progress, the castle doors opened once more, and Lex walked in carrying an unconscious Cayman. Everyone suddenly turned to look at him, causing Lex to freeze. Using his exceptional social skills, he was able to pick up on the subtle cues that let him know that there was something wrong with the situation. One example of such a subtle hint was the razor-sharp sword pointed towards him by his very guests. Someone less experienced than him might have missed such a clue, and likely would have attributed it to strange local customs among mercenaries. Chapter 1564 Heart Demon. Be at ease, Lex said, noticing the rising tension. Your commander simply fainted due to shock. Here, allow me to wake him up. He will confirm for you all that we are the reinforcements you have all been expecting. Lex used one of his healing techniques to lightly stimulate the magma lion, providing it with just enough energy to rouse it. Cayman struggled to open his eyes, drowsiness weighing down his eyelids. He was more than just exhausted, yet as an immortal he was quite resilient, so the moment his brain started to work even the slightest, he woke with a start, lurching out of Lex's hold. The magma lion quickly took stock of his situation before taking a deep sigh of relief when he realized reinforcements had actually come, and he hadn't been dreaming. Your soldiers are a little tense, Commander. Why don't you calm them down so that we can see to getting you all healed and rested up? The lion looked about and saw the look of doubt and hesitation on the mercenaries' faces, and knew that things were not far off from taking a drastic turn. What are you all doing? Stand down. I already have news from the condottiere. The Midnight Inn has come here to reinforce us. The Midnight Inn? I've never heard of an army called the Midnight Inn, said one of the beasts, a hint of doubt and hesitation evident in his voice. The lion looked towards Lex, as if wanting him to explain. In truth, even Cayman was confused about why the inn would be the one coming to help them when they themselves bought protection through them. With that said, he could not forget so easily that human had wiped out those locusts. That was not the act of a mere innkeeper. The Midnight Inn is, naturally, not an army. Instead, we are an inn, providing hospitality, safety, and many other services to our guests. We also have taverns that we bring to guests who cannot come to the inn, such as in your case. We have been tasked to bring a tavern to you, and assist you in your quest. You do not need to worry about your safety. Within the walls of this tavern, you are absolutely safe, and can allow yourself to rejuvenate. We have an incredible medical wing where you can heal. We have food that will allow you to recover all your strength, and other services that can allow you to relax and let go of the stress you've accumulated. Lex spoke with great vigor and conviction in his voice, reassuring his guests that they had nothing to fear. He could tell that most of them, upon hearing the lion's words, had calmed down, and finally allowed themselves to feel relief. Some, he could tell, were still doubtful, but he was certain that sooner or later they would come around. "I take it you are in command of this tavern," Cayman said, looking at Lex. "Yes. You may call me Lex. I'm Cayman, of the Dagon lava fields, and commander of the Reaving Dread's forces here in Abaddon. My men need rest and healing. Why don't you have your staff guide them to where they can get either of the two? In the meantime, I think it's best we talk. There are things we need to discuss, and clarifications that need to be made." "Yes, that would be for the best," said Lex, though he did not need to inform the workers of anything. They were highly trained, the best of the best, so they naturally knew how to attend to their guests' needs. A majority of the services ran automatically, thanks to the system, but much of the tavern needed to be attended to manually, and so the staff had already divided themselves into groups. A majority had dispersed across the castle, ensuring that all the services were up and running. Even if the service itself was automatic, it still needed someone to actually operate it. The rest took it upon themselves to look after the guests, all of whom were particularly touchy. Though, such a thing was to be expected from soldiers on the battlefield, and they were professional enough to handle it. As Lex and the still bleeding Cayman separated from the group, going somewhere they could talk comfortably, a small group of soldiers watched them leave with wary eyes. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" one of them asked as he looked at the others. "It's obvious," responded another. "We've all encountered some kind of mass or shared heart demon. On the battlefield for years, without hope of seeing home or resting or eating good food, we've all snapped mentally. Or maybe we've finally encountered a new kind of foe within Abaddon, the kind that can twist our minds and show us illusions." "Obviously," said a third, as if there were no other explanation. "But what you failed to notice is the special attention they're paying to Cayman. As long as the commander is convinced, he can convince the others that this is all real, and soon we will all fall. So we all know what we must do? Naturally, we have to awaken the others to the reality of the situation, but do so without arousing suspicion. If we try to rescue the commander, we'll be caught, since they are paying extra attention to him. Instead, we must first convince the others that this is all an illusion. It won't be an easy task. All of this feels too real. Of course it won't be easy. But heroes never get the easy tasks. For the sake of our comrades, we mustn't give up. Yes, for our comrades. We must pretend to give in to the illusion, but secretly resist it while awakening others to the truth." With grim determination, the group dispersed so as to not arouse any suspicions, off to carry out their holy duty. Fenrir, who had been standing right beside them the whole time, only shook his head derisively. But just as it was about to leave, he had a random thought. It had been a long time since Fenrir had done anything else but sulk, yet now finally it was tempted to do something else. Maybe it was because Fenrir was stuck here, alongside two other friends. Eventually, he could not resist. Fenrir quickly ran outside to the wall, where Little Blue and Sunny were pretending to be soldiers, taking their first ever outing from the inn very seriously. Chapter 1565 Circles. Within the castle tavern, Lex did not have an office, but there was a great hall. Located within the great hall was a seat of power, designed using Lex's tenet of supremacy. Anyone who sat on that chair, and had the authority over the tavern as dictated by the innkeeper, would gain complete control over the tavern. That control was not as simple as being aware of all the services within the tavern, or controlling its layout, although those were also possible. Lex had created the castle with the express intention of being able to survive the most dangerous of sieges, making it the toughest and most durable tavern yet. Control over the castle meant that one could supply it with more energy, making it even more durable, or changing the way the defenses work, allowing it to survive various kinds of attacks. Of course, it also allowed one to make use of the weapons Lex had fit into the tavern itself. Most likely before this expedition in Abaddon was over, he would make use of those weapons and features heavily. For now, though, the Great Hall just served as the venue where he and Cayman could talk. By now, the magma lion had stopped its bleeding, which meant it no longer dripped a boiling liquid, hot enough to boil an ocean, all over the tavern floor. It was for the best, really, since the smell of blood was not really as pleasant as the aroma wafting through the castle. Originally, Lex had meant to make the tavern smell like lilies. Instead, he had made it smell like fresh linen. It was not a mistake, just a random whim. He could change the smell whenever he wanted. "Can you tell me how long your tavern is going to be here?" the lion asked. "And are you certain it can survive the onslaught of the locusts?" "The walls of your castle prevent my spirit sense from extending outwards, so I'm not so certain what's happening outside." "The walls are impermeable to ensure our guests' privacy," said Lex. "But rest assured, I am completely aware of the situation outside. The castle has many contingencies, so it will not fall so easily. Of course, if there are other threats out here in Abaddon that I am not yet aware of, then do let me know. The more we know about what to expect, the better we'll be able to handle it. The first and greatest mistake you can make here is thinking you fully understand your enemy. If you begin to expect them to behave in a certain way, then you are setting yourself up to fail. I will, however, tell you what I know. But that is a long conversation. First I need to understand a few things on my own." "Right, you asked about the tavern. The tavern will stay here until you complete your mission and rescue a soul from the chalice of the abandoned. But here does not literally mean this position. The tavern can move, so the decision that needs to be made is whether we will travel with you once you leave the tavern, or teleport directly to you once you stop. The problem with accompanying you is that we have countless workers who are not equipped to fight and survive in such a terrain. Staying within the tavern would be the best option for them. However, if we accompany you, then our mutual strength will allow us to travel further and hasten our quest." "I'm afraid you do not have as much of a choice as you think," Cayman said gravely. "If the distance between our groups becomes so great that you lose sight of us, even for a moment, then we will become separated not only by an immense space, but also by an irregular flow of time. It will be almost impossible to find each other again." Lex frowned. He was not about to disregard Cayman's advice, for he had literally put his life on the line to accumulate experience. That did not mean, however, that he would take him at his word either. The difference in their abilities and experiences meant that they would approach a situation differently, and might come out at different results. For example, Cayman had used a very powerful law to fight the locusts, but the drawback of using powerful laws was the strain of using them. Comparatively, Lex used a simpler law more creatively to achieve a desirable result. That did not mean Lex was stronger than Cayman. He certainly wouldn't underestimate someone supported by a system specifically designed for mercenaries. In fact, he was certain that the Reaving Dread had some hidden advantages over others, which is what had allowed them to survive for so long. Lex silently summoned a few clones of himself and sent them out of the tavern using stealth. His clones weren't strong enough to put up a decent fight, but they could be used to accumulate information. "If that's the case, then we'll likely accompany you when you depart. You need not worry about protecting us, the inn has its own ways of ensuring that its staff comes to no harm. This does put us in a favorable position to explore Abaddon faster though. While my main mission is to provide you with sanctuary until you complete your own quest, I have also been tasked with learning as much about Abaddon and its history as possible. Traveling through the lands will help with those aspects of my mission. You are taking this too lightly. Your first priority should be trying to figure out how to survive in this place as long as possible. We've been here for years, and likely will be here for years more. If we complete our mission, or learn anything about this place, it will be incidental, and will be done while we try our best to survive." Lex studied Cayman. The lion was clearly suffering from PTSD, and was severely demoralized. If he did not adjust his mentality, then the chances of them completing this mission anytime soon would really be minuscule. Simultaneously, the lion studied Lex, and could tell that the human wasn't taking their situation as seriously as he should have. If he did not wise up, he would not survive long in Abaddon. I assure you, I would not do anything that would besmirch the Midnight name, Lex said, placating the lion. Even if you don't believe that I'm taking this situation seriously, believe that I would never joke with the reputation of the inn. You think I am not taking this seriously only because you have not seen the capabilities of the inn. Once you heal a little, I encourage you to tour the castle walls. You'll get a better idea of what we're capable of. Those words seemed to appease the lion somewhat, for he really believed that Lex would not take lightly the reputation of the inn. You said you can move the tavern. Does that mean we can just stay within and use the tavern to traverse these lands? If the castle's defenses really are as incredible as you say, it would become our best chance at surviving. The tavern can be deployed anywhere, that is correct. But the tavern is not actually mobile, even as he imagined himself running a wandering tavern. Deploying in a fixed position is actually a requirement for many of its protective formations which rely on its surrounding terrain. In that case, we will need to discuss in detail how exactly you plan on following us. I need to know everything, in as great detail as you can share. There isn't always strength in numbers. If you mess up and don't act appropriately, you may even put us at risk. We're going in circles, Lex said. You keep asking us for information, and I keep asking you to tell me about what dangers Abaddon has. Without knowing at least some of what to expect, how can I decide on our formations? We need to start at the beginning. Let me get you some food and some medicine, and why don't you start telling me about Abaddon, right from the start? The lion sighed upon hearing Lex's words, and finally allowed himself to relax a little. The truth was, he himself was still too tense, unable to completely adapt to the situation. I suppose I really could use some rest, he lamented. Wait, I have an idea. Follow me, I'll have someone bring the food directly to us, said Lex as he led Cayman to a hot tub room. Except, this hot tub room was not ordinary. Instead of hot water, the tub was filled to the brim with red-hot lava. The lava was not of any special flame, such as dragonfire or hellfire, but that did not mean it wasn't absolutely blistering. Moreover, since it was in the hot tub, it had all the relaxing and naturally healing qualities that a normal hot tub from the system would have. Come on, this should help you loosen up, said Lex as he jumped in the flames. He was no longer afraid of lava. Instead, he used it to relax. Chapter 1566 Graveyard of Secrets. Cayman hesitated, but eventually relented and got in the lava-hot tub, letting out a deep groan as he did. Just because he was a magma lion did not mean that fire or lava would heal him. They would, at most, allow him to feel comfortable as he returned to his natural habitat. Yet how could the lava in the Midnight Inn's hot tub be normal lava? Cayman felt as if a million warm hands were massaging his body and releasing a soothing energy into his body, allowing it to heal itself better. As an immortal, Cayman's body's natural healing ability was phenomenal. But the locusts similarly had a very strong ravenous intent infused throughout their body, which would infect the body of their victims. Removing that intent from within his body wasn't exactly easy, for it needed to either be combated with an equally powerful intent, or slowly whittled out of his body. An immortal without at least some kind of intent was practically impossible to find, and Cayman too had a powerful intent. In fact, his fire intent was at the 4th level of transformation, which was already above average for the average Earth immortal. In comparison, Lex's sword intent was actually only at the 3rd level. Admittedly, the lower level was because he usually focused on growing in other aspects, such as improving his physical strength as well as his domination. Those two aspects of his were the strongest, besides his defense, of course. Yet the reason why Lex's intent seemed more effective than Cayman's was because Lex was much too used to fighting above his level. His insight into laws was surprisingly deep in aspects that other immortals lacked in, despite his short time within this realm. Most importantly, his diverse skill set did not actually make him weaker. Instead, each new skill he learned and picked up supplemented his power as a whole, allowing him to achieve unexpected and unanticipated feats such as using sword intent to target the soul, as well as karma together. Something like this could not be achieved by someone who focused solely on a single skill, for they would need mastery over multiple difficult fields. In essence, despite having a stronger intent than Lex, the reason why Cayman could not remove the ravenous intent filling his body was because his application of his intent was limited, though he couldn't be blamed for that. By normal standards, he was already incredible enough for keeping the ravenous intent from sweeping through his body and devouring his soul. The soothing lava from the hot tub did not eliminate the foreign intent, at least, it didn't do so promptly. However, it had begun work on purifying his body, and included in that purification was all foreign intents. I missed the smell of fresh lava, Cayman groaned with his eyes closed, all his fatigue and tension beginning to slip away. Yeah, I have some fond memories with lava too, said Lex, recalling that one time he had accidentally fallen into a lava pool back in the crystal realm when he was underground. He was nearly cooked alive back then, and only survived because of how durable Regal Embrace had made him. Good times. For a few minutes, the two of them sat in silence, but even as Cayman let go of some of his worries, he could never truly relax, so he quickly sobered up and began his story. We arrived in Abaddon just 7 years ago, despite it feeling like centuries, he said, looking out into the distance, as if he could see his own arrival in these accursed lands play out in front of him. Back then, we arrived here with another force called Superstore in the Apocalypse. To be honest, they weren't all that strong, but the leader of the force was quite formidable. They managed to survive the longest of any of the reinforcements we got, though I'm getting carried away. Lex didn't reveal his thoughts with his expression, but he couldn't help but think about the Superstore in the Apocalypse system, which is most certainly what it would have been called. It was such an original and entirely entertaining idea. It wasn't like there were literally a bunch of videos about people surviving in superstores for a month or so on the internet with millions of views. We had our orders from day one, and they haven't changed yet. Back then, the condottiere had stumbled upon this place personally, but couldn't stay because his presence attracted far more dangerous enemies. He shared what little he knew about this place before leaving. Apparently, Abaddon is a place that has existed for a very long time, but exactly how long it has existed, no one actually knows. He told us to collect as much information about this place and its history as we could, and that he'd try to ensure we always had some allies to help us along, but that we wouldn't be able to leave until the mission was complete. In the beginning, things were fine. Just like we are being attacked by locusts right now, we were being targeted by locusts back then. For a few months we managed to avoid getting slaughtered. Although the folks from the Superstore weren't great fighters, they had incredible tools and resources, and they kept us well fed. Morale was high. Then we encountered a locust king, and the owner of the Superstore couldn't quite survive that. Since then, true to his word, the condottiere kept sending us reinforcements, although, for some reason, they were never more fighters. It seems like we were always meant to be the main fighting force, while the others would fall into some kind of supplementary role. Lex silently wondered if all those reinforcements that Cayman had gotten had all unlocked their joint quests through access to primordial energy too. It seemed unlikely, since primordial energy shouldn't have been so common, and these people who could so easily be wiped out didn't seem strong enough to go look for it out in the universe. During this time, we learned a bit about Abaddon. We encountered ruins of civilizations that seemed eerily well preserved, though we couldn't understand why. As if that was not enough, all of those ruins seemed to have murals depicting critical events, cluing us in on the history of this place. It seems that the very existence of this place is to punish condemned souls, much like hells are depicted in many faiths. But I think that, there's a lot more to it than that. I have no proof, but I think Abaddon's very existence relies on absorbing the energy from multiple souls. You think the locusts are like puppets controlled by this place? Lex asked. Like puppets with which Abaddon absorbs souls? Cayman shook his head gravely. No, I think the locusts are more like parasites than anything else. Abaddon. Abaddon is far more terrifying than anything I care to imagine. A couple of times, we've seen the souls of the deceased get absorbed into this place before they disappear. I dare not even think about what I sensed in those times. All I can say is that I was probably under some kind of illusion, because I could have sworn I felt auras containing Tao in some of the souls that were pulled in. The lion trembled at the mere thought, but Lex only frowned. Don't take your senses too seriously, he said. If you really sense the Tao, even from a deceased soul, then you'd likely already be dead or overwhelmed by the contamination of that aura. Probably, Cayman muttered, though he didn't sound convinced. The mysteries of this place are far too many for me to tell. Many of them are because I'm simply unable to recall them. Each time we visit a set of ruins, we end up encountering a challenge. If we are unable to complete the challenge, everything we learn from the murals get erased from our memories over time. The problem is that we don't have the time or the energy to spare to complete an additional challenge, so to date, we have only completed a single challenge, and even that was by accident. But of the things we ended up learning, I don't think we can actually believe even a single one of them. They are much too fantastical to be true. What did you learn? Too many fragmented things. Everyone knows that the Dawn era has had 3 ages, but one of the first things we learned is that there may have been an entire age that the entire universe has completely forgotten about, known as the Forgotten Age. Even evidence of that age's existence was wiped out of the entire universe. You can see why I would hesitate in believing something like that. It is more likely a child's fable than reality, and yet it's enough to plant seeds of doubt. This place has too many secrets. One might even say that Abaddon is a graveyard for secrets, all of them buried and left to be entirely forgotten. Chapter 1567 Catastrophe. An entire age that the whole universe forgot about? Yeah, I can't even imagine what it would take to do something like that, Lex said, more intrigued by the claim than anything else. I don't think there are enough Tao Lords in the universe to accomplish something like that even if they worked together. Exactly. Which is why it is only common sense to ignore something like that. But I think that knowledge here contains some kind of, I'm not sure how to put it, contamination, or maybe some kind of deep causality might be accurate. Even though with my mind I can conclude that such information is false, my soul bears the weight of it as if I have learned a great secret of the universe. As if that is not enough, even for the ruins where we completed no challenges, and forgot the knowledge we learned, a fraction of the weight continues to exist, as if it will haunt us for the rest of our lives. Lex frowned, and then studied Cayman using all of his senses, even going as far as checking his karma. He could not see anything amiss. That's odd, because I don't feel anything even after you told me about the Forgotten Age. You have to visit the ruins to get the full effect, Cayman said. But that makes me unsure if such knowledge is a curse or a gift. My experience tells me that the weight of this knowledge can benefit me somehow, I just need to figure it out how. What else did you learn there besides the Forgotten Age? All the knowledge had to be deciphered, for it was recorded in murals, not words. There are things we could misunderstand, but we did our best. The Forgotten Age seemed verily linked to Abaddon, though the exact details can only be speculated on. It seemed like Abaddon was a special region where powerful artifacts were stored, or maybe they were created here. Ancient powers once seemed to gather during that age for some reason, as driven together with a unified purpose. It was through those murals that we actually learned the details about our objective, the Chalice of the Abandoned. It seemed that, during the Forgotten Age, a catastrophe had struck, one unlike anything the ancient powers had ever faced, or even anticipated. The arrival of external threats brought about internal fractures, and war ensued. Seeing the unity break, the strongest of the ancient powers abandoned the rest, and that is where the Chalice of the Abandoned was created from. Using the death of countless powers, utilizing the suffering of their souls as fuel, and their bodies as resources, a chalice was forged, its purpose uncertain. Just as some used insidious means to create a terrible artifact, others used the method of self-sacrifice, giving up portions of their own minds, willfully contributing it to the creation of an entirely different artifact called the Well of Forgotten Dreams. These two artifacts together should have protected the bearers from destruction. Should have, because with the arrival of the catastrophe, nothing remained. The land was scorched, and all life ceased to exist. I'm not sure if all life ceased to exist in a major realm, or some other space, but the mural seemed to strongly signify that the catastrophe initiated the reign of death over the universe. The last picture of the mural just showed a solitary figure, looking out over a massive graveyard, as if it was meant to signify the burial of the whole universe. I do not know why I kept coming to that conclusion. It was almost as if everyone who looked at it could imagine nothing else. In the end, I could not help but think of a terrible idea. What if the Forgotten Age predated even the Primordial Age? What if the reason why no one recalled that age was because all life in the universe had been wiped out, and it was only after the passing of the catastrophe that the Primordial Age began? Who's to say what happened back then? After all, little to nothing is known about even the Primordial Age itself. You're letting speculation get the better of you, Lex said gravely. I don't know much about what you've been through here. I mean, you literally just started the story. But I can tell that the weight of these thoughts is seriously affecting you. If you don't get a hold of yourself, you're going to fall into cultivation deviation, or develop a heart demon. I mean, what does it matter if there was a secret age or not? Why does it matter if all life died or not? What happened back then may have historical significance, but on your daily life, right now, it has no great impact. Maybe one day down the line such knowledge will become relevant, but if you don't get a hold of yourself, you'll be long dead by something entirely unrelated. Like a locust, or some other threat here in Abaddon. Cayman stared deeply at Lex for a while, unspeaking, but eventually only sighed. I know. I too wish to move away from such thoughts, but the weight of this knowledge is very real, and it won't go away. I am incapable of not thinking about it, or being affected by it. That's why I said that the knowledge here is contaminated. It wasn't just the locusts that killed our many reinforcements. Just learning about Abaddon itself makes one more likely to die. Lex began to ponder Cayman's words, as he himself fell into another bout of silence, thinking about all he had been through. His side quests had been to gain knowledge about Abaddon and the things that happened here, as well as about the Well of Forgotten Dreams as well as the Chalice of the Abandoned. He had noticed how the system too only gave him quests related to things Cayman already knew the existence of, as if even the system itself could not peek through the secrets of Abaddon. If that was true, it was both reassuring, since it meant that the system wasn't entirely omnipotent, but it was also terrifying. The system was far more powerful than Lex could currently even imagine, so what exactly about Abaddon had stumped even the system? Chapter 1568 The Black Knight. While contemplating the limits of the system's power, as well as the mysteries of Abaddon, he also gleaned a hint into the rationale behind joint quests, or competitive quests as Mary had mentioned. It seemed that whatever power governed the systems across the universe was not all-powerful, and there were limits even to its power and knowledge. Yet the system users themselves became a tool to expand its power. For now, Lex was still unable to decide what or who he thought controlled the systems. He didn't want to make any guesses, for he felt that it might paint his perspective towards his guess. Even so, if he had to guess, Lex felt like all the systems were controlled by, or at least somehow connected to, a central system of sorts. At the moment, however, none of that mattered. He turned to Cayman, who seemed ready to continue his story. Like I previously said, the dangers of Abaddon are not just a few. After the owner of the superstore died, we received reinforcements from many forces, but they all seemed to die pretty quickly, right up until the arrival of a force simply called the bookstore. They were frighteningly powerful, so much so that they performed even better than us. But this place, it seems the very existence of hope causes Abaddon itself to conspire against you. The forces from the bookstore were too strong to take down normally, so that caused us to face a different kind of foe from the locusts for the first time. We encountered the wraiths. Incorporeal beings swathed in shadow, filled with suffering, they were harder to kill than even the locusts, and harder to defend against too. Unlike the locusts, who lusted for the soul, wraiths hungered after powerful bodies, and possessed their targets if not successfully fended off. It was tough to survive their existence at first, but we managed, which brought about the arrival of the chimeras. The chimeras were, and still are, the most formidable enemy we have faced within Abaddon to date, and are practically unkillable. It is easier to escape from them than to face them in battle, so that is what we were forced to do. Unfortunately, our desperate escape led us not to a ruin, but to a citadel of sorts. Just like the ruins, the citadel contained murals, and just like the ruins, it contained a challenge. We, with our prior experience, avoided the challenge, but those from the bookstore did not. I don't know what they learned there. Maybe I did, but I already forgot. Either way, whatever they learned in the citadel affected the forces from the bookstore far more than any enemy we faced so far. I don't know how they did it, but they paid a great price then to exit Abaddon, and forfeit on this task. The condottiere was extremely infuriated by their actions, and even tried to retaliate against them. Ever since then, we have been incredibly careful to avoid ruins and citadels, lest it affect our reinforcements, or even us. But even without the threat of cursed knowledge, Abaddon is no playground. It never fails to bring out new threats and surprises. The Black River, right behind your castle, for example, is a prime example of a threat. Do not take for granted that it won't move. Who's to say that the river won't suddenly come to life and attack your castle? Certainly not I. Cayman continued his story, slowly revealing to Lex the depths of the horrors they had faced in the last 7 years. Even his casual hint about how the condottiere might react if they tried to leave had been slipped in seemingly as a casual tidbit amidst all the other pieces of information he shared. Lex, meanwhile, continued to listen, and come up with his own conclusions about the situation. By then, one of Lex's clones had gotten far enough away from the castle that it was nearly out of sight. After turning back to look at the castle once, the clone jumped forward down a small hill, finally removing the castle from direct view. The clone did not feel like it was teleported, nor was its connection to Lex's main body severed, so he climbed back up the hill to take a look. Yet instead of the familiar landscape it had just come from, what lay beyond the hill waiting for it was a lone man, wearing black, metallic armor. "Your soul smells special," the man said as it moved forward and gripped Lex's clone. The clone tried to resist, but retaining only a fraction of Lex's strength, it failed miserably. Lex had a strong feeling that getting caught by the armored man would be bad for him, so he immediately dismissed the clone, causing it to disappear just before the armored man would have caught it. Simultaneously, all of Lex's other clones seemed to encounter the exact same armored man who seemed even more desperate to get his hands on Lex. One by one he dismissed all his clones, his expression turning serious. There was something seriously wrong with that armored man. Yet before he had a chance to think about what to do, the armored man appeared on the very periphery of his spirit senses, within sight of the castle tavern. "Follow me," Lex suddenly cut Cayman off and stood up, the aura around his body suddenly changing. Lex didn't explain much. He simply put on a double-breasted suit and walked out of the castle and approached the rampart where the Midnight Battalion was fighting against an endless tide of locusts. "There's a new enemy," Lex said as he looked out, and spotted the armored man even from a distance. "Yes, we already spotted him," said Luther, who stood on the walls with his arms folded. "Should we take extra precautions?" Lex stared at the approaching figure, and then at Cayman, who seemed bewildered at what he saw. "No, just tell Z to catch him alive. We need to interrogate him to learn more about this place." At that, Luther smiled. There was nothing he enjoyed more than interrogating the enemies of the inn. Nothing. Chapter 1569 Cliché. Interrogate? What are you talking about? Cayman asked as he looked out at the black night waiting through the locusts. "I sent clones out of the castle to explore the surrounding area and understand more about Abaddon," Lex explained. "They left under stealth, and I'll have you know, my stealth isn't the greatest, but it's still pretty effective. Everything was going fine, until they encountered that black night. Even though all of my clones were in different areas, that black night found them all in a matter of seconds. He said something about my soul being special. Since he couldn't get his hands on my soul through my clones, I'm pretty sure he came here to find my real body. Unfortunately for it, my real body is nowhere near as weak as my clones, not to mention everyone else here is no pushover." Cayman's expression turned solemn as he stared at the night. If that thing spoke, then it should be somewhere on the same power level as the chimeras. Be incredibly careful, chimeras are practically indestructible in their own level. There's even a possibility it's stronger than a chimera since I've never seen a knight before. Lex did not respond immediately, and waited for Luther to go past Lex's instructions to Z. In the back of his mind, Lex remembered that he still had to ask Luther about the lead he got on creating a hell, but now wasn't the time for that. Cayman, do you have much experience with humans? He finally asked, Lex's gaze locked onto the knight. Do you know what makes them special when compared to other races? Cayman frowned, and thought about it. In truth, the only interaction he had had with humans were with those in Reaving Dread. Compared to beasts, or even other races, they were not as resilient, not as strong, did not have many innate affinities or special abilities. Besides their above-average intellect and their adaptability, nothing about them really stood out to him. Not really, no, he said. It's instinct, Lex confided. It may not sound too impressive, but humans have a stronger instinct than other races. It's just that, due to our relatively low position on the cosmic ascendance spectrum, our instincts have weakened, and need to be trained. But once it's trained well enough, it's effective to the point of almost becoming like divination. So are you saying that your instincts are telling you of how dangerous that thing is? Cayman asked. Exceedingly dangerous, Lex confirmed. Compared to the locusts, it is more powerful by order of magnitudes. In fact, I am not sure if Z alone can handle it. But it has been a long time since Z has had to exert his full power. It'll be good for him to stretch his muscles a little. In truth, Lex didn't think Z would be able to handle the knight. But with Lex there to step in the moment something went wrong, this would be the perfect opportunity for Z to polish up his combat ability. He had even received some ancient legacies, and unless he put them to practice, he'd never reach the absolute limit of his ability. There's also the fact that Z himself should have pretty strong instincts too. That should make things more interesting. And before you begin, don't think I'm not taking this seriously. I'm taking this very seriously. You will understand shortly. Without any further explanation, Lex turned to look towards Z. Despite his demeanor seeming like he was relaxed, Lex had all his attention focused on Z. Should anything happen, not only would Lex be able to teleport to him in an instant, he could also remotely erect protective barriers around Z. Speaking of protective barriers, it had been a long time since Lex actively focused on improving his understanding of defense. He should have a clone meditate on that topic, lest he lose all the progress he got from Regal Embrace as he moved up in level. Z, meanwhile, was standing on the rampart, coordinating the defense in a highly efficient manner. He let the locusts come close to the walls so that the attacks wouldn't have to travel far, and time wouldn't be wasted in aiming. He also used the least amount of energy to keep the locusts at bay, ensuring that they would be able to maintain their defense for decades without interruption. But he had only just established the defensive line when Luther informed him of a change. Z looked out into the distance and felt his mind buzz when he laid eyes on the knight in black armor. Lex, Cayman, and even Luther had suffered no backlash when they saw the knight, for they were all highly experienced cultivators, who had endured countless trials and tribulations. Z, on the other hand, despite training harshly and taking on immense responsibility, did not have quite the same level of experience as those three. Thus, the very sight of the enemy was like a spiritual attack, one he had been unprepared for. Lex had wanted Z to fight the knight because he wanted him to hone the legacy he had received from the human king, but what Lex hadn't taken into account was that Z was someone who had been raised on anime. Most anime protagonists did not use swords, but the king's legacy had to do with swords. As such, all Z had really done was take inspiration from those legacies to create his own skills. The baton appeared in Z's hand once more. Setting the stage for an epic fight didn't go well with fighting efficiently, but he also couldn't afford to hold back. After all, Z had already seen through Lex's intentions. Bringing him here to Abaddon, some strange, forsaken place, to fulfill some secret mission and fight off countless enemies? Discover secrets hidden from the entire universe? Uncover a conspiracy that spanned the universe and threatened to destroy all life as we know it? Oh please, that was the most cliché plot Lex could have come up with. That was all just an excuse. In truth, Z was certain that Lex already knew how to complete his mission in this place, but wasn't revealing it because this was just the beginning of Z's training arc montage, where he would face countless powerful enemies one after another. Since that was the case, if he didn't overcome his limits and surpass his current strength, he was afraid Lex would end up telling him to manage even more stores. He would never do that. The very canyon shook from the bass of Z's music as he whipped his baton through the air, crushing the locusts into paste. The knight, however, had survived because of course he had. "Let the training arc begin," he whispered. Chapter 1570 If Looks Could Kill. The Reaving Dread was a mercenary group, but describing them as such would be quite inadequate. They were not mere mercenaries, they were the best of the best, the most ferocious and capable fighters, able to outperform anyone within their rank. It was quite common for members of their mercenary group to fight above their level, and with the special augmentations provided by the condottiere, they were also especially difficult to kill. It was exactly those features of theirs that allowed them to survive for so long in Abaddon, while everyone else who tried to accompany them died. That was not to say the reinforcements were weak, or didn't help. They were quite strong, and relieved a tremendous amount of pressure off of them. But ultimately, they all fell short. Now, though, Cayman was really questioning whether they really were the best of the best. He always knew that they were destined to never get the elitist fighters in the realms, for they usually did not become mercenaries. They usually had organizations to back them up, or powers of their own to rule. But the difference should not have been great. It should not have been. Really, the Reaving Dread were supposed to be awesome. Yet as Cayman looked upon the human who had once again begun to fly above the rampart with baton in hand, killing an army of locusts with a wave of his hand, he could not help but feel inferior. In truth, it wasn't Cayman's fault. If after being baptized by numerous star realm changes, and the energy from a newborn realm, and receiving the inheritance of a human king, as well as the numerous other advantages the Inn offered him, if Z couldn't even do this much, then it would be a real waste. It wasn't for nothing that the Midnight Inn had become recognized as the spot with the humans with the greatest potential in all the universe. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that in the future, if the human race ever got Dao Lords, there was over a 90% chance that they would come from the Midnight Inn. A cape made of orange energy began to emerge from behind Z as he continued to wave his baton, slowly raising the tempo of the music reverberating through the canyon with each wave. Clouds began to gather in the red sky above Abaddon and an ominous pressure began to build, as if a destined showdown was about to begin. As Lex watched Z build up his momentum for his battle, something unexpected happened. He gained a new black bead. Lex was slightly confused about why watching Z fight would get him a bead, but he didn't waste time thinking about it. Instead, he deployed all the beads he had gathered so far, choosing to completely surround one of the lone white beads. As soon as he was done, Lex began to receive feedback from the board, slowly learning more about the game, and finally got a hint as to how he could retaliate. His latest bead, the one he got from watching Z, was placed directly over the surrounded white piece, crushing it much like the rook piece crushed his beads. Lex felt a sliver of a cool energy flow into his body and disappear. He had no idea what that energy was, but he got the feeling that he had stolen a hint of his opponent's destiny. Two battles were taking place, one silent and hidden, and one out in the open. Just as the Black Knight was about to reach the castle walls, the music reached its zenith, filling Z with a level of excitement he hadn't felt in a long time. "Behold, the beat drop," Z exclaimed, and waved his baton downwards, causing it to disintegrate and mix in with the music that had filled the canyon. Just as the name implied, the beat dropped, and with it, Z dropped onto the black with his first punch. Just like that, the battle began. Thunder roared in the clouds above as purple lightning snaked through the black clouds that had gathered. The ground trembled continuously, as if shaking in fear. The very air was sharp with anticipation, a result of the unique intent that Z had mastered. But those were just the more obvious repercussions of their first clash. Through Lex's eyes, the world had turned into a jungle of chains as Z manipulated the laws with his tenets. The Black Knight, similarly, caused a reaction in laws as well. He was not using tenets, as far as Lex could tell. Rather, his very armor contained the power of laws, as a result of which his every move caused a ripple through the laws. Lex could see that Z's combat strategy involved gaining momentum, and everything he did served to raise it. From the music, to his attacks, even to defending against attacks, everything Z did continued to raise his momentum, empowering him. The Black Knight, on the other hand, was a force of destruction. As he attacked, he not only targeted Z directly, but also targeted his momentum, reducing it as much as he could. Unfortunately for Z, the Black Knight was inherently much more powerful than him, so whether it was in their direct fight, or in their fight to manipulate laws, the Knight was winning. "He is not as strong as the chimeras," Cayman said, surprising Lex with his words. "But his ability to manipulate laws is greater. I suspect he is also more intelligent than the chimeras, making him a huge threat." As if to emphasize on that very fact, the Black Knight landed a vicious kick right on Z's face, throwing him back and causing his body to crash into the castle walls. "You don't have time for a long fight," Lex said calmly, his voice reaching Z down below. "Your strategy of momentum gain is a good one, but it doesn't suit a battlefield. More enemies are on the way, you need to think of something else." Z opened his eyes, ignoring the blood dripping down his forehead, and looked at the Black Knight the way he wanted to look at his boss every time he had to work an extra shift. If looks could kill, the Knight would already be dead.